Iowa, 1945. The evening sun cast long shadows across the camp's recreation yard, where smoke rose from charcoal grills in thin gray columns. American soldiers laughed as they turned corn on the cob over flames, butter dripping, kernels charring blackened spots. 20 German women stood at the fence line, watching with expressions that mixed curiosity and contempt. They whispered to each other in harsh tones. Corn was animal feed, peasant food, something you gave to livestock, not people. But the smell sweet, smoky, rich with butter carried on the wind, and despite themselves, they leaned closer. The train had crossed half a continent, moving west from the Atlantic coast through landscapes that seemed designed to overwhelm. Mountains giving way to endless plains, rivers wide as seas, cities that stretched for miles, untouched by bombing, their lights blazing at night as if rationing were a concept belonging to other, lesser nations. Greta Schneider pressed her face against the window, watching America unfold like some impossible advertisement for abundance. She was 23, captured in France while serving as a communications specialist. The propaganda had prepared her for many things, for cruelty, for savagery, for the moral decay that supposedly characterized American society. It had not prepared her for this, for sheer scale, for wealth so casual, it seemed almost offensive. Beside her, Ilse Fischer muttered something about decadence, about how this abundance proved American spiritual poverty. The words sounded hollow even as she spoke them, the rote repetition of teachings that made less sense with each passing mile. But Ilse clung to them anyway, needing the certainty they provided, however illusory. They arrived at Camp Clarinda in southern Iowa on a day when the heat pressed down like something physical, and the sky stretched endlessly blue. The camp occupied former civilian Conservation Corps facilities, wooden barracks arranged in neat rows, surrounded by farmland that rolled away to horizons that made European fields look like garden plots. The women were processed with the same bureaucratic efficiency they had encountered at every step since capture. Forms, medical examinations, assignment of barracks and work details. An American officer addressed them through an interpreter, explaining rules and expectations in language so mundane it was almost comforting. No drama, no threats. Just regulations delivered in the tone of someone reading a maintenance manual. The mess hall stood at the camp's center, a long building with screened windows that let in breezes carrying the smell of growing corn from the surrounding fields. Inside, industrial-sized tables stretched in rows. The kitchen occupied one end, visible through a serving window, where cooks worked with the practiced efficiency of people who had fed thousands and would feed thousands more. That first evening, the women filed through the line, holding metal trays, watching as American soldiers served portions that seemed absurd in their generosity. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, bread with actual butter, milk in glasses filled to the brim, and on each tray, inexplicably, 2 ears of corn, boiled, yellow, glistening with melted butter. Greta stared at her tray with confusion bordering on revulsion. Corn. In Germany, corn meant animal fodder. You fed it to pigs and chickens. Poor farmers might eat it ground into coarse flour during desperate times, but it was not food for people who had other options. Yet here it was, served alongside meat as if it were a vegetable worthy of human consumption. She sat with a group of women who shared her bewilderment. Ilse picked up an ear, holding it by the ends, examining it with the expression of someone presented with an incomprehensible object. "They eat this? Like this?" Her voice carried genuine confusion. Around them, American soldiers ate corn with casual competence, holding ears with both hands, running them between their teeth, extracting kernels with movements that looked practiced to the point of instinctive. It should have looked primitive. Instead, it looked entirely ordinary, which somehow made it more disturbing. Greta bit into the corn tentatively. The taste was not terrible. Sweet, The butter helped, but the texture was wrong. The kernels stuck in her teeth. The juice ran down her chin. It felt undignified, eating with your hands, gnawing like an animal. She put the corn down after 3 bites, unable to continue. Other women made similar attempts, with similar results. Some managed a few bites. Others refused entirely, leaving the corn untouched on their trays. When guards collected the trays and saw the waste, they looked puzzled but said nothing. Just scraped uneaten corn into bins with the same mechanical efficiency they applied to everything else. The camp needed labor. Iowa was in the midst of harvest season, and the war had drained rural areas of working-age men. The women were assigned to various agricultural operations, working in camp gardens, helping at nearby farms, processing vegetables at a local canning facility. The work was physical, but not brutal. 8 hours daily, under supervision that was watchful, but not oppressive. Greta was assigned to a farm 3 miles from camp, owned by a family named Henderson. Every morning, a truck collected a dozen women and drove them through cornfields, so vast they seemed to have no end. The corn stood higher than a person's head, rustling in the constant wind, making sounds like whispered conversations in a language just beyond comprehension. Mr. Henderson was 62, weathered by decades of farming, his hands permanently stained by soil. His wife Martha was 10 years younger, gray-haired and practical, her efficiency in the kitchen matching her husband's efficiency in the fields. They had 3 sons in the military. Their absence hung over the farm like visible weight. The Hendersons treated the German women with cautious courtesy, not warm, but not hostile. They demonstrated tasks clearly, provided water and rest breaks, spoke slowly when communication was necessary, bridging the language gap through gestures and repetition. They expected work, but did not demand impossibility. Greta found herself assigned to the vegetable garden, a plot that would have been called a small farm in Germany. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash, and inevitably corn. Sweet corn, Martha explained through gestures, and broken German phrases gleaned from a neighbor who had immigrant grandparents. Different from field corn, meant for people, not animals. The explanation made little sense to Greta. Corn was corn. But she worked as directed, picking ripe ears, loading them into bushel baskets, carrying them to the truck for transport to the canning facility. The work was meditative in its repetitiveness. Pick, load, carry, repeat. No thinking required beyond immediate physical tasks. The idea came from the camp's recreation director, a lieutenant named Bradley, who believed prisoners needed morale-boosting activities. Work alone was not enough. People needed moments of normalcy, of leisure, of something resembling ordinary life even in extraordinary circumstances. He announced a cookout for the following Saturday. An outdoor meal, grilled food, American-style entertainment. The women received the news with suspicion. This felt like manipulation, a propaganda exercise designed to show Americans in favorable light. They discussed it that evening in the barracks, voices low, trying to determine what the angle was, what they were supposed to learn from this performance. Ilsa was convinced it was meant to demonstrate American superiority, to rub their faces in abundance while Germany starved. "They want us to feel inferior," she said, her voice tight with anger that felt increasingly performative. "To break our spirits with their waste." Greta was less certain. She had watched Americans for 3 weeks now. Their efficiency, their casual assumption that food would always be available, their complete lack of awareness that others lived differently. This did not feel like calculated cruelty. It felt like people doing what seemed normal to them, unable to comprehend that normal was different elsewhere. Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. The cookout was held in the recreation yard, a fenced area with picnic tables and a cleared space for games. Someone had set up horseshoe pits, a volleyball net. American soldiers arrived carrying coolers, bags of charcoal, folding chairs. They moved with the easy camaraderie of people preparing for a familiar event, laughing, joking, calling to each other in voices that carried across the yard. The women gathered near the barracks, watching from a distance. The soldiers fired up grills, metal contraptions on legs that seemed purpose-built for outdoor cooking. Smoke began to rise. The smell of burning charcoal mixed with something else, something that would become familiar but was still alien. The smell of food cooked over open flame. Lieutenant Bradley approached the women, gesturing for them to come closer. "Please join us," the interpreter translated. "This is for everyone, guards and prisoners together. Just a meal. No formality." The women moved forward reluctantly, maintaining distance, clustering together defensively. They watched as soldiers placed food on the grills, hamburgers, hot dogs, and then, with great ceremony, corn. Ears still in their husks, soaked in water, placed directly on the grill where flames licked around them. Ilsa laughed. A harsh sound without humor. Look at them. Cooking animal feed. Several other women joined her laughter, the mockery feeling safe, familiar. A way to maintain distance. To preserve the certainty that they were different, better, not like these people who grilled corn as if it were proper food. But as the corn cooked, as the husks blackened and began to open, as butter was brusquely applied to exposed kernels, the smell changed, intensified, became something that had very little to do with the boiled corn they had been served in the mess hall. It smelled sweet, smoky, rich in a way that bypassed thought and went straight to something more primitive. The smell of food cooked over fire, a scent humans had been responding to for millennia. Greta felt her mouth water involuntarily. Around her, other women had stopped laughing. They watched with expressions that had shifted from mockery to something more complicated. A soldier approached with a platter of grilled corn, husks peeled back, kernels charred in places, glistening with butter that was starting to brown. He offered the platter to the women with a grin. "Best corn in Iowa," he said, unaware or unconcerned that they could not understand him. "Got to try it." The women looked at each other. Pride warred with curiosity, with hunger that was not quite physical. Ilsa shook her head firmly. "No, we are not animals." But a younger woman named Anna reached out tentatively, took an ear, held it carefully, feeling the heat through the husk. She looked at Greta, seeking either permission or solidarity. Greta found herself nodding. Anna bit into the corn. Her eyes widened. She chewed slowly, processing not just the taste, but the complete sensory experience. The sweetness, so much more pronounced than boiled corn. The smokiness. The texture still crisp, not mushy. The butter mixing with natural sugars, caramelized by heat. She swallowed, took another bite, then another. "It is ... double quotes." Anna paused, searching for words. "It is not what we had before." Other women watched her. The soldier offered the platter again, patient, still smiling. One by one, they took ears, bit into them, experienced the same surprise that Anna had shown. This was not animal feed. This was something else entirely. Something that made sense suddenly, why Americans treated corn as food worth eating. Because like this, grilled and buttered and charred at the edges, it was. Greta took an ear, bit into it, tasted smoke and butter and sweetness that seemed almost excessive, felt juice run down her chin, and did not care about dignity because the taste was too interesting to worry about appearance. She ate the entire ear, gnawing kernels from the cob with increasing efficiency, and when she finished, she found herself wanting another. Ilsa had not taken any. She stood apart, arms crossed, face set in an expression of determined refusal. But Greta saw how her eyes kept returning to the grill, how she tracked the platter as it moved through the group, how her jaw worked as if chewing something invisible. The following week, Greta returned to the Henderson farm for her regular work shift. The morning was cooler, autumn beginning to assert itself. The corn in the fields had turned brown, ready for harvest. But in the garden, the sweet corn patch still held a few late ears, protected by their position near the irrigation line. Martha Henderson was working in the garden when the women arrived. She gestured Greta over, pointing to the corn patch, then to a pile of husks. Through a combination of gestures and simple words, she communicated that they would pick corn and roast it for lunch. Greta and 2 other women spent the morning harvesting. The corn was heavy, dense with kernels. They worked in silence broken only by the sound of husks tearing, the rustle of leaves, the occasional comment about which ears looked best. The meditative quality returned. Pick, examine, harvest, stack. The simplicity was almost peaceful. At noon, Martha lit a fire in an outdoor grill pit older, and more elaborate than the camp's metal contraptions, built from bricks decades ago and stained black by years of smoke. She soaked the corn ears in a bucket of water, explaining through gestures that this prevented burning. Then she placed them directly on the grill grate over glowing coals. The women watched with the interest of people learning a process that might prove useful. Martha turned the corn regularly, rotating each ear so it cooked evenly. When husks were thoroughly blackened, she removed them using long tongs, peeling back the charred outer layers to reveal kernels that steamed in the cool air. She handed an ear to Greta. No butter this time. Just corn, cooked simply, flavored only by smoke and its own sweetness. Greta bit into it. The taste was cleaner than the camp cookout version, less overwhelming, but still fundamentally different from boiled corn. The fire had transformed it, unlocking flavors that water could not reach. Martha watched her eat, nodding with satisfaction when Greta took a second bite. Then she said something in English, speaking slowly. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was clear. This is how we do it. This is our way. You can learn it too. They ate lunch together. The women, Martha, Mr. Henderson, who came in from the fields, grilled corn, fresh tomatoes, bread and cheese. Simple food consumed in companionable silence. No shared language, no deep conversation. Just people eating together, the most basic form of human community. That evening, Greta wrote to her mother. The letters were censored, limited in what they could discuss, but within those constraints, she tried to communicate truth. We are fed adequately here, she wrote. The Americans have food in quantities I did not think possible. They cook in strange ways. Today I ate corn grilled over fire. It tasted nothing like what we knew. Sweet, smoky. I did not think corn could taste like this. I do not know what to make of it. Everything here contradicts what we were told. She paused, pen hovering over paper. What she wanted to write was more complicated. At every meal, every casual abundance, every moment of unexpected decency eroded the certainty she had carried from Germany. That propaganda had prepared her for American cruelty, but not for American normalcy. That being treated as human, rather than enemy, was somehow harder to process than mistreatment would have been. But those thoughts were too dangerous, too complex. So she wrote instead about weather, about work, about small details that might pass censorship. And she hoped her mother would read between the lines, would understand what was not said. Other women wrote similar letters. Anna described the cookout in careful terms, emphasizing the strangeness of American customs, while hinting at the cognitive dissonance they produced. A woman named Marguerite wrote about the Henderson farm, about working beside an American family who had lost sons to war, but treated German prisoners with surprising courtesy. The letters crossed the ocean, passed through multiple layers of censorship, arrived in a Germany that bore little resemblance to the country the women had left. Their families read about corn and cookouts and American kindness, and tried to reconcile these descriptions with their own experiences of bombing and occupation, and hunger that was increasingly desperate. Ilse continued to refuse grilled corn. This became a point of pride for her, a line she would not cross. At the second cookout, when corn was offered, she turned away ostentatiously. "I am not an animal," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "I will not eat animal feed no matter how they prepare it." But her resistance was increasingly isolated. Most women had tried grilled corn by now. Some genuinely enjoyed it. Others found it tolerable. Few maintained the categorical rejection that Ilse clung to. The mockery had faded, replaced by acceptance or at least acknowledgement that this was simply how Americans ate. Greta watched Ilse with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. She understood the impulse, the need to maintain something pure, untainted by contact with the enemy. If you ate their food, enjoyed their meals, participated in their customs, where did that leave your identity, your loyalty, your sense of who you were and what you stood for? But Greta was also tired. Tired of maintaining walls that required constant effort. Tired of rejecting things simply because accepting them felt like betrayal. Tired of ideology that grew heavier with each day spent in a place where reality contradicted teaching at every turn. One evening, she approached Ilse in the barracks. They had been friendly before capture, not close, but cordial. Now something had changed. A distance had grown. Greta wanted to bridge it, or at least understand it. "Why does it matter?" she asked quietly. "It is just corn." Ilse's expression hardened. "It is not just corn. It is accepting their way, admitting they are right. If we eat their food, enjoy their customs, let ourselves be comfortable here, then what were we fighting for? What did any of it mean?" Greta had no answer. Or rather, she had an answer Ilse would not want to hear. That perhaps what they had been fighting for was wrong. That perhaps the propaganda had been lies. That perhaps accepting American food was not betrayal, but simple survival, both physical and spiritual. But she did not say this. She just nodded and returned to her bunk, leaving Ilse alone with her certainty, wondering how long it could last. October brought cooler weather and the main corn harvest. The fields around camp came alive with activity. Mechanical harvesters moved through rows, cutting stalks, stripping ears, leaving behind stubble that would be plowed under for next year's crop. The scale was staggering hundreds of acres harvested in days, yielding more grain than entire German provinces produced in a season. The women were assigned to help sort and load corn at a grain elevator near camp. The work was dusty, monotonous, physically demanding. But it provided perspective on American agriculture's sheer scope. Train cars were loaded with corn destined for livestock feed, for industrial processing, for export. The abundance was not propaganda. It was real, measurable, overwhelming. Greta stood atop a mountain of corn kernels, shoveling them into a sorting machine, and tried to process what this meant. Germany was starving. America had so much corn they could feed it to animals without a second thought. This was not moral superiority. It was geography, climate, resources. But understanding that intellectually did not make it less devastating emotionally. That evening, the Henderson family invited the work crew to dinner at their farmhouse. This was unusual. Prisoners normally returned to camp for meals. But the harvest was nearly complete, and Martha had asked permission through official channels to offer a thank-you dinner. The camp commander approved, seeing no security risk in women dining at a farmhouse 3 miles from camp under guard supervision. The house was modest by American standards, probably generations old, with worn furniture and faded curtains. But it was whole, undamaged. The kitchen had running water, electricity, a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. A radio played music from somewhere, big band sound that felt alien and familiar simultaneously. Martha had prepared a feast: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from her garden, fresh bread, and inevitably grilled corn. She had cooked it on the outdoor grill, the same way as before, and brought it inside, still steaming. Husks peeled back, kernels glistening. The women sat at the dining table, an act that felt transgressive somehow, being invited into an enemy's home as guests rather than prisoners. Mr. Henderson said something that sounded like a prayer. They ate. The corn was perfect. Late-season sweetness concentrated by cooling nights. Smoky from the grill. Butter applied with Martha's careful hand. Greta ate 2 ears, no longer self-conscious about the process. Around her, other women did the same. The meal had a quality of timelessness, of ordinary ritual that transcended politics and war and all the things that had made them enemies. After dinner, Martha brought out a photo album, family pictures. The 3 Henderson sons in uniform, cousins, grandparents. She pointed to faces, said names, tried to communicate through images what words could not convey. This is who we are. These are the people we love. We are not so different. The women looked at the photos with something close to pain. These could have been German family albums. Same poses. Same expressions of ordinary affection. Same hope and pride visible in parents' faces as they photographed sons in uniform. The universality was unbearable. By November, grilled corn had become unremarkable. Just another food served occasionally at camp events. The women ate it without comment, without mockery, without the intense emotional significance it had carried initially. It was simply corn, prepared a certain way, tasting good, nothing more complicated than that. But this simplicity represented something profound, the erosion of categorical thinking, the acceptance that American ways were not inherently inferior just because they were different, the slow dissolution of propaganda that had depended on maintaining absolute distinction between us and them. Greta noticed changes in herself beyond food preferences. She laughed more easily. The constant tension that had characterized her first weeks in camp had eased. She found herself looking forward to work at the Henderson farm, to conversations conducted through gestures and broken language, to moments of simple human connection that required no ideology to justify. Ilse noticed too. She cornered Greta one evening, her face showing anger mixed with something that looked like fear. "You have forgotten who you are," she said accusingly. "You eat their food, smile at their jokes you cannot understand. Act as if this is normal, as if they are not the enemy." Greta looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Maybe they are not the enemy. Maybe they were never the enemy. Maybe we were told lies about people who are just people." Ilse's expression crumbled. If that is true, then what was it all for? What did we lose everything for? Greta had no answer. The question was too large, too painful. She could only offer what she had found. I do not know what it was for. But I know I cannot keep carrying hate when there is no reason for it. I am too tired. The corn is just corn. And I like how it tastes grilled. The camp observed American Thanksgiving in late November. Lieutenant Bradley explained the holiday through interpreters, a day of gratitude, of feast, of acknowledging blessings. The irony was not lost on anyone. Prisoners celebrating a holiday in a foreign country while their homeland lay in ruins. But the feast was real. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, gravy, pumpkin pie. And, despite the season being wrong for fresh corn, someone had acquired canned corn which was grilled on husks fashioned from leaves, an approximation of the authentic experience. The women attended the Thanksgiving dinner with mixed feelings. Gratitude seemed complicated when you were grateful to your captors for not treating you worse. When the abundance you experienced existed in direct contrast to the privation your families endured. When every meal reminded you that the propaganda had been lies, but acknowledging those lies meant confronting what you had supported, however unknowingly. Still, they ate. The food was good. The portions generous. And there was something powerful about the ritual of giving thanks, even in circumstances that seemed to preclude gratitude. Greta sat with her plate, looking at food that would feed her family for a week, and felt tears sting her eyes. Anna, sitting beside her, reached over and squeezed her hand. No words, just acknowledgement of the complicated grief they shared, loss for everything that was gone, confusion about everything they were experiencing, slow acceptance that the world was stranger and more nuanced than propaganda allowed. The December cookout was smaller than previous ones. Cold weather had arrived, and outdoor events were less appealing. But Lieutenant Bradley insisted, arguing that tradition mattered, that maintaining routines helped morale. So fires were lit, and food was prepared, and people gathered despite temperatures that made breath visible. The corn was different as time-dried corn, soaked overnight, then grilled slowly over low heat. It took longer to cook and tasted different, less sweet but more substantial. A soldier offered Greta an ear, and she accepted automatically, eating while standing near a fire, grateful for the warmth. Ilse stood apart, as always. But Greta saw how her expression had changed. The defiance had softened into something closer to resignation, or perhaps exhaustion. The effort of maintaining ideological purity had worn her down the same way it had worn down everyone else who tried. Greta approached with her partially eaten corn. "It is cold," she said simply. "The food is warm. Your principles will not keep you from freezing." Ilse looked at her, looked at the corn. Her jaw worked, emotions playing across her face too quickly to identify individually. Then, slowly, she reached out, took the corn from Greta's hand, bit into it. She chewed slowly, swallowed, her eyes closed. When they opened, they were wet. "It tastes good," she whispered. "Why does it taste good?" "Because it is good," Greta said quietly. "Because they cook it well. Because maybe some things are not about politics or propaganda. Maybe sometimes corn is just corn." Ilse ate the rest of the ear in silence. When she finished, she looked at her hands butter-stained, holding an empty cob, and something in her posture changed. The rigidity that had defined her for months drained away, leaving her looking smaller, older, defeated in a way that had nothing to do with military loss. "I do not know what I believe anymore," she said. "That makes two of us," Greta replied. "Maybe that is where we start." The letters Greta sent home that winter were different from earlier ones, more honest, more reflective. She wrote about grilled corn explicitly now, describing the taste, the process, the strange way such a small thing had become significant. She wrote about the Henderson family, about American soldiers who were not monsters, about slow erosion of certainty. "Mother, I do not know what to tell you," one letter read. "Everything I believed has proven false. Not dramatically false, not in ways that feel like betrayal, just slowly wrong, like a map that shows roads in the wrong places. The Americans are not savage. They are not morally inferior. They are just people who happen to have been born in a different place. And their corn, grilled over fire, tastes better than anything I expected to find in captivity." Her mother's response, arriving 2 months later, was brief and cryptic. "I understand what you are saying without saying it. Many here are learning similar lessons. The world is rebuilding. We must rebuild ourselves as well, even if that means letting go of what we thought we knew." Other women received similar responses. Families in occupied Germany were confronting their own cognitive dissonances, their own realizations that propaganda had been lies, their own slow acceptance that victors were not monsters, but humans, flawed and complicated, and sometimes surprisingly decent. The letters created a strange bridge. Prisoners in America and civilians in Germany, separated by an ocean, and all the things that separation meant, finding parallel paths toward similar conclusions. That ideology had failed them. That certainty had been false. That moving forward required letting go of past convictions, however painful that release might be. March brought warmer weather and preparations for a new growing season. The Henderson farm needed help with spring planting, and Greta's work crew was assigned to assist. They spent days preparing soil, laying out rows, planting seeds that would grow into the year's crops, including corn. Sweet corn for the family, field corn for livestock and grain markets. The process was methodical, almost ritualistic. Plant, water, wait. Trust that sun and rain and time would transform seeds into something useful. Martha gave each woman a small packet of sweet corn seeds, a gift she indicated through gestures. For your own garden someday, when you go home. Something to remember. Greta held the packet carefully. The seeds were small, hard, seemingly inert, but they contained potential. Given proper conditions, they would grow, would produce ears of corn that could be boiled or grilled or processed into flour, would feed people or animals or both, depending on type and need and circumstance. She tucked the seeds into her pocket, feeling their weight against her hip. A strange gift. A promise of future that assumed she would have space to plant them, time to tend them, reason to care about harvest. All things that felt uncertain in a world still finding its shape after catastrophic war, but she kept them anyway. Not because she believed she would ever plant them, but because they represented something she could not quite articulate. Connection, maybe. A possibility that enemies could become something else. That food could bridge divisions no treaty could span. That sometimes transformation came not through grand gestures, but through small, repeated acts of ordinary decency. By April, word came that repatriation would begin soon. The women would be processed, documented, and returned to Germany. The news brought relief and terror in equal measure. Relief because captivity was still captivity, regardless of how benign. Terror because Germany was destroyed, occupied, unknown. Home only in name, not in any meaningful sense. Greta walked through the camp one final time, committing details to memory. The barracks, the mess hall, the recreation yard where she had first mocked grilled corn and then slowly learned to eat it without irony. The place had become familiar, safe. Leaving felt wrong, even though staying was impossible. She visited the Henderson farm for a final work shift. Martha had prepared lunch sandwiches, fresh vegetables from the greenhouse, and, despite it being too early in the season for local corn, canned corn that she grilled anyway. A farewell gesture, an acknowledgement of the small ritual that had become significant. They ate in the spring sunlight, tasting smoke and sweetness, and the complicated emotions that food can carry when it means more than sustenance. Martha gave Greta a canvas bag containing more seed packets, a small trowel, a piece of paper with instructions written in careful German that someone had translated for her. For your garden, Martha said through the interpreter who had come for this occasion. Plant these when you get home. When things are better, remember that growth is always possible. Greta accepted the gifts with tears she did not try to hide. She wanted to say something profound, to express the full weight of what these months had meant, how they had transformed her understanding of everything. But no words came. She could only nod and whisper, "Thank you." The bus departed on a morning wrapped in fog. The women loaded their small bags, everything they owned fitting into single canvas sacks, and climbed aboard. Greta took a window seat, pressing her face against the glass, watching the camp recede into gray mist. They drove past the Henderson farm. Through her window, Greta saw Martha standing in the yard, one hand raised in farewell. The gesture was small, almost invisible in the fog, but Greta saw it. She raised her own hand, pressing palm against cold glass, holding the position until the farm disappeared behind them. The journey to the coast took 3 days, then processing at the port, then loading onto ships for the Atlantic crossing. Greta stood on deck as America's coastline faded, thinking about everything that had happened in the 10 months since capture. The meals, the work, the slow erosion of certainty, the corn grilled over open fire, Ilse stood beside her, also watching the coast disappear. They had not spoken much since December. But now Ilse reached over and took Greta's hand. "I am afraid," she said quietly. "So am I," Greta replied. "What do we do with what we learned here?" Greta had no answer. She could only hold Ilse's hand and stare at the vanishing shoreline and think about seeds in her pocket, about potential waiting for proper conditions, about the possibility that growth could happen, even in devastated soil. Germany in spring 1946 was rubble and reconstruction, cities destroyed, infrastructure collapsed, millions displaced, searching for family, for shelter, for any way to survive. Greta's hometown had been bombed 3 times. Her childhood home was gone. Her mother lived in a single room in a building that had lost its roof. They reunited in tears and silence. Too much had happened to discuss immediately. Too many losses. Too many changes. They held each other and cried, and eventually began the slow process of rebuilding lives from whatever pieces remained. Greta showed her mother the seeds Martha had given her, explained their origin, described grilled corn in American abundance and slow transformation that came from repeated exposure to ordinary kindness. Her mother listened with an expression that mixed grief and understanding and something close to relief. "I am glad you found this," her mother said finally. "Glad you learned that not everything we were told was true. It makes the loss easier, somehow, knowing that there is decency in the world, even across battle lines." They planted the seeds in a small plot behind the damaged building where they lived. The soil was poor, full of brick dust and rubble, but they enriched it with compost, watered it carefully, waited with the patience of people who had learned that growth takes time. The corn grew, not prolifically, but adequately. By midsummer, they harvested 12 ears. Greta built a small grill from salvaged metal, following the process she had learned in Iowa. She grilled the corn slowly, turning it carefully, waiting for husks to char and kernels to transform. Her mother tasted it and smiled for the first time in months. "This is good," she said. "Different, but good," Greta nodded. "That is what I learned. That different is not inferior. That American ways are just ways, not attacks on what we knew. That sometimes corn is just corn, and what matters is whether it tastes good." Decades later, Greta would tell her grandchildren about the war, about capture, about Iowa. She would describe Lieutenant Bradley's cookouts and Martha Henderson's kindness and the peculiar significance of grilled corn. The grandchildren would listen politely, not quite understanding why this mattered, unable to connect food with ideology, with transformation. But she persisted, because the lesson had been too hard won to let die, because propaganda had almost succeeded in making her hate people she had no reason to hate, because grilled corn had become the vehicle for dismantling that propaganda, one bite at a time, until certainty crumbled and humanity remained. She grew corn in her garden every year, grilled it over charcoal in summer, using techniques learned from American soldiers and an Iowa farm wife, shared it with neighbors, with family, with anyone who would eat. And sometimes, holding an ear of corn charred at the edges and glistening with butter, she would remember standing at a fence in Iowa watching soldiers laugh and cook, and feeling contempt transform slowly into curiosity, into acceptance, into something that might have been gratitude. The war ended. The camps closed. The women returned to rebuild lives from ruins. But they carried memories that propaganda could not erase, of enemies who treated them with decency, of food that bridged cultural divides, of small transformations that accumulated into profound change. Iowa, 1945, smoke rising from grills, women laughing at food they once called animal feed, and the slow, patient work of truth dissolving lies one meal at a time. The corn was never just corn. It was a door that opened slightly, an invitation to question, a taste that contradicted teaching, And for some like Greta, it was the beginning of understanding that the world was larger and stranger and more generous than propaganda allowed. She kept Martha's trowel her entire life, used it every spring to plant corn from seeds descended from that first Iowa packet. The continuity mattered. The connection across years and oceans and all the things that divide people into us and them. Because sometimes transformation comes not through argument, but through taste. Not through grand gestures, but through someone offering grilled corn to prisoners and saying, simply without irony or superiority, "This is how we eat. You can try it too." And that changes everything.